Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you, Professor De Lucca, to our new meeting for the series of Phenomenology of Religious Experience. Today, we are going to interpret phenomenology in a wide sense because Professor De Lucca is an expert, a scholar on Campanella's thought. I thought it would have been very precious to hear more about this unfortunately not well-known philosopher. And Professor De Lucca is an expert of Campanella's political and jurisdictional thought, but today is going to explore also the religious area of this philosopher. So thank you so much, Professor, to have accepted our invitation. And the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure. Right. Okay. So thank you. As you said, it's a very broad understanding of the phenomenology of religious experience, even because we're in the late 1500s and early 1600s with Tommaso Campanella. As you said, he's not exactly one of the most well-known philosophers. Many listeners would have probably heard of his most well-known work, his Utopia, the City of the Sun, which is probably nowadays the most well-known work of Tommaso Campanella. It wasn't in his own times. There were other works. We mentioned some of them that were known to the 17th century reader much more than the City of the Sun, which is his Utopia. Now, knowing that perhaps even the biography of Campanella is not well known, but it's very much related to his works and to the history of his works, and of course the development of his own ideas. What I thought of doing, not to for the sake not to become too long, is to focus on the theme, of course, of religion, which is very much of an all-pervasive theme in Campanella from his very early works right until the end. But even within his own thought, there were different emphasis over time, and of course, even things he chose to accentuate with the development of his own thought. So I'll take some of his works and his life as a bit of an Ariadne's thread to link everything up. But of course, I'll focus on the theme of religion, especially in relation to, first and foremost, his idea of natural philosophy, which is the source of his thought, and then his political thought. So perhaps in the end, we'll get to the City of the Sun itself. So that is to conclude on a note that is, let's say, a bit more well known. Campanella's notion of religion is complex for two reasons. First of all, because it is discussed in practically all of his works, and there are many works by Campanella. Some of them are available in very rare editions. Others, perhaps in recent years at least, we have modern editions, many of them not in English. So most of the editions of Campanella's works have been in Italian, though over the years some key texts have been translated into English as well. So it is complex because, like much of his thought, which is very unitary in its character, themes, different works speak to each other and build a very unitary body of works at the end. This reflects the fact that he himself was a very eclectic thinker. Even in terms of his sources, it is hard to pin him down to a particular tradition, because one of the aims of his project was precisely to try and move away from a dogmatic understanding of philosophy and of knowledge, which is based on the strict adherence to schools of thought, and rather to focus on knowledge itself. And this attitude, which is very strong in the works of Campanella, also accompanies him in his own reflections on the subject of religion, which of course in the 1700s has a very significant historical background. First of all, Campanella was writing at least towards the end of his life, during the 30 Years' War, the religious divisions in Europe, right after the Reformation. And also on an intellectual level, of course, the 1500s marked the opening up of we could say, of a new era in intellectual history, with the subject of religion being, of course, one of the bones of contention, even among philosophers and literary writings. If we just think of the works of, I don't know, of Machiavelli, of Pomponazzi, and the so-called irreligious literature of the time, Campanella, of course, was very much aware of this, and very often entered into that kind of controversy as well. Of course, he himself was a Dominican, so he was trained in theology. He can be considered a theologian. One of his most important works was a 30-volume Theologia, a work on theology, which in some way, and I say this very superficially, he saw as an update of Thomistic theology. So he considered himself to be a Thomist, but not an Aristotelian. On the intellectual front, just to give some coordinates, on the intellectual front, his main contention was with Aristotelian philosophy. In fact, in his very early years, he got himself into trouble because he was reading works that were not accepted in the canonical houses of study of the Dominicans, including, of course, Plato and the Neoplatonists, who had a very important influence, especially in his early years, which then remained there throughout. But as we shall see very soon, his most important early influence was the natural philosophy, or the philosophy of nature, of the even lesser known, perhaps today, Italian philosopher Bernardino Telesio, who was the master he never met. I'll start very soon with Campanella's very first work, which was actually a defense of Telesio against his adversaries. Within the community of scholars of Campanella, there has been a rather prolonged debate about what the overall attitude of Campanella to religion was. I won't go into this historiographical discussion because it is quite complex. But what I can say is that, in synthesis, there have been two main ideas. The first one is that although Campanella remained a Dominican, even though eventually he spent almost 30 years in prison, including because he was accused of heresy. Eventually he was freed and became a master of theology within the order itself. But so a set of scholars have seen him as a bit of a simulator, someone who used religion, very often religious discussions, more than anything else, to avoid any further persecution and to try and please those who had some sort of power over him. Another school of thought sees in Campanella's life, and I would agree more with this way of saying things, that Campanella's early works were definitely marked by an interest in natural philosophy, especially, and political reality, the political realities of his time. So the early political works were very specific, dealing with particular situations. And then, in the first years of his imprisonment, something changed, because the works that followed were theoretically much stronger, and even his attitude towards religion and the role of religion started being developed and articulated in a much deeper way. But as I said, if we take as a starting point sort of his very first work, we're in 1591. Campanella wrote this work entitled Philosophia Sensibus Demonstrata, the philosophy shown to us by the senses, by sense experience, which pretty much lays down the very basis of his theory of knowledge. Knowledge of the world is acquired through our experience of the world. And the most important element in his natural philosophy, which follows Telesio, is that the world is like a living book. He uses this very famous analogy. The world is a living book written by God, he says, which is very different to his to Galileo's idea that the world is a book written in mathematical characters. Campanella had an ongoing epistolary dialogue with Galileo. He was the first one, incidentally, one of the very first to defend Galileo in his first trial, and he later published the work, the Apologia pro Galileo, the defense of Galileo, where he makes an interesting observation. In its simplicity, I think it's very interesting in the context, and even in reading the Galileo affair from our perspective today. He says that first of all, any problem, any incoherence is not is only artificial, is only apparent, because he says if one accepts that nature and scripture have the same author, then there can be no contradiction. It's either that the theologians are getting it wrong in their interpretation of scripture, or else that the scientists are getting it wrong in their interpretation of nature. In other words, in their explanation of natural phenomena. But let's leave Galileo aside for the time being. For Campanella, everything in nature had what he calls this sensus. Everything is sentient. Everything has life in it, and everything moves towards its preservation, its self-preservation. What he calls this appetite, this appetite for self-preservation, and this applies to absolutely every living thing. So for him, he imagines nature, he imagines the world as this great living organism, this book of nature, or this body of nature, like one body, which, we'll get to this later on, is also the way in which he sees politics. It is an artificial body, but for him, politics, the organization of the state, done properly, should be modeled on nature, should be natural in this sense. Now, as I said, we know, according to Campanella, we know nature through our experience. There's a very interesting phrase he uses in one of his letters written in the early 1600s. He says, "I learn more from the anatomy of an ant and from observing the characteristics of herbs than from all the books that have been written." Of course, he uses this hyperbole on purpose to, first of all, in controversy with Pico della Mirandola and that school, and the humanist school of thought, but more specifically to show, right, that the fundamental principle of Telesio's naturalism, that nature should be studied according to its own principles. This was the key idea in Bernardino Telesio's philosophy. His work, in fact, is the title of his work is De Rerum Natura Juxta Propria Principia, so on nature according to its own principles. And besides the substance of what Campanella says there, it's the attitude that is important. Campanella was extremely weary, and he states this in very clear terms, of the predominant attitude in philosophy, broadly construed, that is even in natural philosophy, of relying first of all on authority, that is, of a dogmatic approach to philosophy. If there's one thing which Campanella was against, was all sorts of dogmatism. In fact, since I mentioned Galileo earlier, it is in that defense of Galileo that Campanella coins the phrase libertas philosophandi, the freedom, what we could today refer to as intellectual freedom. So all sorts of inquiry, should enjoy this intellectual freedom. And even though he disagreed with Galileo on several points, this is what he was advocating while he himself was in prison. Now, and this is also what marks his approach towards anything that had to do with religion. In a context, an intellectual climate, not only within his own Dominican order, but in general, that was rift with orthodoxy of the rigid kind. Campanella held the belief and defended the belief that discussions on anything, including on religion, had to presuppose this intellectual freedom. Of course, the fact that this was not always granted was what got him into trouble in the first place as well. But for him, this was a necessary precondition. So anything that any form of inquiry needed this intellectual freedom. So what emerges very clearly is that on the subject of religion, Campanella is always comparing these two books, and I'm using the image he used himself because I think it's the best way of explaining his approach. It's this comparison between the book that is Scripture, by which he means, of course, religion, theology, etc., and nature. And the philosopher, the true philosopher, he says, is he who or she who tries to find any discrepancies and resolve them. So that is where philosophy comes in, which is why he places a lot of importance on metaphysics as a medium, as a discipline between natural philosophy and theology. Right? Even in terms of the language that is used. Sometimes Campanella is a theologian through and through, in the sense that he writes as a theologian with all the presuppositions. But the other great monumental work, besides the 30-volume Theologia, is not coincidentally the Metaphysica, where very often the themes are the same, the ideas are the same, but they're expressed in different language. So already in Campanella we have this attitude, first of all, of not assuming that there is a shared religious language, but at the same time that the exploration of not only of religious and theological questions, but also of the study of nature and especially of man, needs a language that is adequate. Campanella is never very explicit about this point, but it is something which I think can be observed in many of his works. Needs to have a language, to develop a language of philosophy which is open and which is shared. Now, so this is, as we said, on the point of view of from the point of view of the relation between nature and religion. Now, another important aspect of Campanella's thought, which fits into what we've been saying, is knowledge. As I just said before, knowledge of the world, knowledge of nature, requires first and foremost the experience of nature. That is the observation of things themselves, of those phenomena. Campanella spoke of two kinds of knowledge. It is interesting that what he uses is the word sensus, sense, which is the key term in his early work, which sometimes he replaces with notitia, which knowledge. So he distinguishes between what he calls the innate sense, the sensus innatus, and the acquired sense, the sensus illatus or sensus antitus. So there is a certain knowledge, certain kind of knowledge, which is innate, which is known, which we just know, which is self-evident, and there are other things which we know through observation, of which we acquire knowledge through observation. Campanella is not, of course, like many in the pre-Cartesian pre-Cartesian philosophy, is not an exclusivist. In other words, what he's interested in distinguishing what can be known immediately and what can be known through experience. But even the terminology there is interesting, but it's not something I'll go into it at this point. So knowledge is nature is known according to its own principles, he says, but then there are other things that one knows just by being, and here his metaphysics comes in, which I'll explain just in terms of the three terms he uses to describe both God and man. And these are the three concepts of power, wisdom, and love. Now, it is interesting as a bracket that the three main officials in the City of the Sun, which is the poetical synthesis of his entire thought, are called Pon, Sin, and More, which are the three which are a play of words on potentia, sapientia, and amor. But even there, this unity of being. So for him, God as the supreme being represented precisely the totality, the fullness of being, as the fullness of power, the ability to act, of knowledge, and of love. And he saw man as being as participating in precisely these three characteristics, these three metaphysical, what he calls, the term he uses is primalities, the primalitates, the primalities of wisdom and love. Now, it is because of this internal dynamic, right, that, according to him, man has a natural, this innate knowledge of God. He presents a number of arguments of this. Some of them sound more Thomistic, others take the more of the via negativa, in the sense of the knowledge of our limits in power, wisdom, and love indicate that there is a complete, so that is his whole metaphysical discussion. But the most important thing is that this kind of knowledge is so closely tied to what he refers to as man's nature, that it is just there. And this, according to him, is primarily what natural religion is all about. And so to understand his idea of natural religion, this is the term he uses, it is precisely this understanding, this sensus innatus, this innate knowledge of this metaphysical dynamic. But of course, together with the natural religion, there's also historical. There are also historical religions, and this is what represented for Campanella in that historical period in particular the more problematic aspect. I'll come to the historical religion very, very soon. But I just wanted to open up a bit, perhaps unpack the idea of natural religion from the perspective of another important influence in Campanella, which I mentioned earlier, which is Platonism or Neoplatonism, because one of the pillars of Campanella's metaphysics is the idea that everything returns to its own origins. So this idea of return, which of course has very clear Platonic references, but which he takes to be one of the fundamental aspects of his metaphysics. This idea of renewal and return. As a bit of a parenthesis which I cannot leave out in mentioning Campanella, another on these coordinates in tracing the coordinates of influences. Campanella was heavily influenced by the prophetic and millenarian tradition. So he saw in the particular time in which he was living a time of great renewal, of restoration, of the golden age, the opening up of a new age, which, according to him, had to be characterized by going back to origins. In other words, going back to nature. Mm-hmm. And although this is not tied directly to religion, I think it is fundamentally, because his idea of religion is primarily that of unity. For him, religion, for Campanella, it represents primarily unity. Here, as I said, we're speaking about natural religion. We're not going into the historical religions yet. But this is a distinction which for him is important, and it's important for the coherence of his system. This return he articulated at different levels. It was on the political, on the social level. This is what his utopia meant in a way. It was going back to what was important, to what was fundamental, and doing away with the structures and other things that had corrupted that nature. It is also the way in which he is very open, or almost excited in some passages, about the technological developments that were taking place in his own time, but the relation between nature and technology already at the dawn of modernity, before the whole of technology and nature became such an important theme. Campanella had articulated some and had the insights to say things which translated not too freely, however, so quite faithfully, mean that technology should never be used to dominate over nature. So there is also this aspect of his relation with nature. So it's always this return to the origins. In fact, as I said, he speaks about religion in different ways, but there is a particular passage, one passage in his book, in one of the books of his metaphysics, where he gives a very simple definition. It's one of the few clear definitions of religion he gives, and he says that religion is the natural return to God, and not a political invention. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is not an art. It is not a figmentum. It is not an invention. This will relate to Machiavelli's own view of religion in the political debate. And it's interesting that he justifies, or one of the ways, one of the arguments to justify this understanding of religion as the natural return to God, and especially of the characteristic, the natural characteristic of religion, is that the knowledge and the love of other, these are the terms he uses in line with the principles of his metaphysics, depend on the knowledge and the love of self. So within his metaphysics, there's this very clear dynamic of the self and the other, which both contribute to, of course, to knowledge. So this heterosynthesis and the autosynthesis. So natural religion is natural to man. God, the supreme being, what he calls very often the first being, is creator, and sort of pushes this link and its return towards him. It is in this aspect, his metaphysics is clearly Platonic, even though he went out of his way, I should say as a historical note, to show that even the arguments found in Thomas Aquinas are more Platonic than Aristotelian. But that is a controversy which he went into just to make the point that Christian philosophy should not be based on one single classical philosopher. In other words, it should not be based entirely on Aristotle, which today might sound very obvious. Said in the post-Tridentine period, it wasn't obvious at all, and that is actually what had got him into trouble. Right. Okay. I said before that for Campanella, religion represented mainly unity. The term religion is used in different ways in different works, from, as I said, the knowledge of God in terms of natural religion to something more structural. But if we take his understanding of religion in a metaphysical sense, it's related specifically to the other core theory in his metaphysics of the unity in multiplicity. In other words, that power, wisdom, and love are the manifestation of the internal dialectic of, that is the essence of the first being, which he calls, or we may call God, but he uses this term in his metaphysics, not God, but the first being, which is all powerful, all knowing, and all loving. And it is from this internal dialectic then that other beings, this is the multiplicity, come into being, participate in varying degrees in the one being, and to which then they return. Now, this element, this aspect of unity, is also one of the fundamental ideas that link religion with politics. And so now we'll move to that element of Campanella's work, because, as I said, besides the City of the Sun, which is perhaps the most well-known political work of Campanella as one of the most well-known Renaissance utopias, the City of the Sun is actually an appendix to his treatise on politics, in which he says, he said, the subtitle is the poetical dialogue. It's an appendix to the politics, which is a treatise in which he, amongst other things, articulates the relation between religion and politics. Of course, his main target there is Machiavelli, because Machiavelli, like others at his time, in his time, thought that religion was a human and political invention. Now, because Campanella considered, with all the arguments he had explored before, that religion is natural, then he could not accept the claim that it is artificial. In other words, that it is an art, that it is this figmentum, this invention. And in his discussion, Campanella shows that, first of all, religion is, he makes this claim, he says, religion is the first cause of unity in kingdoms and principalities, which can be understood on a very superficial level as saying that what was necessary is for everyone to have the same religion as a unifying factor, but that would still probably sound very Machiavellian. It wouldn't say absolutely anything about whether religion is natural or artificial. When he says that religion is what unites together citizens in a state, what he means is something much deeper than that. What he's saying is that it is at that level that you have what he refers to as the unity of souls. Now, what does he mean by the unity of souls? In very simple terms, what he means is that it is where people know and have this deep innate sense, but which reaches a conscious level, that they are part of a whole and therefore participate in that whole. Which, he continues later, is also the best antidote. So this is my term. It is the best antidote against tyranny. So it is, because it's easy, especially when reading texts written in the 17th century, to just think that where he said the religion is unity and brings unity. It is this deeper understanding of religion he has, even when he is discussing politics. It is the unity at the level of the soul, as opposed to I know, for example, military force, which of course does create unity through order and so many other structures in society. And it is precisely because he saw in Machiavelli's claim the danger of, first of all, caricaturing the idea of religion. And also, now this is Campanella's interpretation. Machiavellian scholars would, of course, or rather, scholars of Machiavelli would possibly disagree with such interpretations. But the way Campanella clearly read Machiavelli was, from this point of view, he thought that by arguing that religion was something artificial, it was removing the very basis of unity in which society is built, because the theme of unity, so central in Campanella, so central in his metaphysics, so central in the unity and the harmony of nature, is also the basis of his politics. And that is what he refers to as, of course, religion. In fact, it is interesting that on another level of unity, Campanella saw the importance of engaging in meaningful dialogue with different religions and philosophical views. He, of course, was witnessing the divisions within Christianity, the divisions that were very obvious and long-standing between Christians and other religions, the very real problems that were being faced when there was contact between Christians and people of other religions. And because this idea of return, because of this sort of prophetic millenarianistic idea, which was his general vision, meant and required a return to unity, any form of division, even though possibly apparently justified, was ultimately not justified at all, because it went against this ideal of unity. So that would prevent that return to origins. So in one of his works, which has as its title a verse from a psalm, that they may be united, as one heard under one shepherd, it's referred to the text as the reminiscentur. He writes a series of legations to the religious leaders of the whole of Europe, so Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all the way in the Far East, from China to India to Africa, etc. And one of the things which he proposes, which might sound strange, is the setting up of a World Council of Religions. Right, we're in the 1620s, of a World Council of Religions, because he said theological debates should be held precisely in the spirit of debate, confrontation, so that the sword, his words, the sword can give way to the tongue. In other words, for him, religion and theological debate could be a force of unity to replace the unity by stealth, the unity by force, that of course was being manifested in many ways, not least through the conquests of the Americas, and in other ways. So even in this sense, even from this perspective, from the perspective you could say of interreligious dialogue, which is the term we would use today, he saw that religion could be a unifying factor of bringing people together, rather than being used as an excuse, as a pretext for division. Because this is one of the main concerns in his political works, is one of the main concerns that politics uses religion as a pretext for division, moving it away from its original intention, because his definition of politics is that of its aim, its end is to bring about peace. And this is sort of why he strongly criticizes, if not Machiavelli, the Machiavellians, those who he calls the Machiavellians. So when it comes to politics, the community of what he calls the community of religion, in the first place, has the ability of uniting in a very strong manner. He says, since it also unites very different nations. I'm quoting from his treatise on politics. So unity of religion, even not just in the single communities, but even on a universal level, because human beings, and here we're going back to where we started from, because religion is natural, because there is this innate religiosity, if you like, that there's this innate religion in each and every person, and therefore in each and every community, religion can also be that force of unifying strongly different nations. So that is also the message that comes across very clearly in the City of the Sun, in his Utopia. One of the lines in the City of the Sun that would have been very strange, sounded very strange to anyone reading the work back then, was that he says the Solarians, the inhabitants of this city, in this great temple, because at the top of the hill there is a great temple, so the idea of priesthood, the idea of the legislator and ruler being a priest, but in a very broad sense of the priesthood. But they also venerated, he says, Christ and the founders of all the other great religions in one place. So this is the image which he presented there. Of course, which some people interpret in terms of his heterodoxy. Again, probably Campanella was more of a Catholic who called for Reformation, and the reason for this is he gives himself, because he considered Christianity to be better, in inverted commas, for one very simple reason, because he thought that Christianity was the religion that was closest to natural religion, to which it added, he says, but this is his argument, to which it added only the sacraments, he says. But, and this is just to conclude this point, because he was not exactly arguing for just for all other religions to convert to Christianity, but his starting point was that Christianity itself as religion had to convert in the proper sense of the word convert, that is, go back to its origins. In other words, if all religions went back to that natural religion, to the origins, in other words, this something that is natural to man, see how the circle starts at some point coming together, then that would really be the more authentic understanding of religion, which would first of all reveal God, but God being, precisely understood in a philosophical sense, power, wisdom, and love, as opposed to the opposites of that. The opposite of power is tyranny. The opposite of wisdom is sophistry. The opposite of love is hypocrisy. In one of his poems, Campanella has this verse, he says, I was born to defeat three great evils, tyranny, sophistry, and hypocrisy. These are the three great evils of the world, he says, right? So, but through that understanding, to that realization, which is also a self-realization, according to him, of power, his ability, wisdom, and love, this dynamic, which he uses as the three coordinates of his metaphysics, that in itself could serve then as the basis for social and political organizations. So yeah, as I said, this is all synthesized then in the City of the Sun, in his more well-known work, which he very much saw, besides being a synthesis, he very much saw as opening up to the realm of possibility, which is why he uses the subtitle A Poetical Dialogue, poetical in the sense of poiesis, in the sense of creation, and especially of transformation. This is what he meant by the transformation of the world. And just to conclude on this point, one of the works that was closest to Campanella's heart, not only because of its content, but also because it was the work that pretty much accompanied his life in prison and his whole life history, which was, quite difficult, is this work entitled Atheismus Triumphatus, Atheism Conquered. In fact, even though Campanella engages in sometimes even strong theological debates within different currents within Catholic theology, with Protestant theology, with other religions, but for him, the main problem, or rather his main concern, was with atheism. And of course, we shouldn't understand atheism as we understand it in its more contemporary manifestations. He accused Aristotle, Machiavelli, that were his preferred enemies with atheism. But what he meant by atheism was precisely this lack of sense of the unity of all things and the sense of returning, the sense of transformation. So for him, God, as we've explained, understood as wisdom, power, wisdom, and love, makes sense in the world. The lack of acceptance of those primarities, right, which have their which are the inner dialectic of the essence of the first being, which he calls God, spells out precisely the opposite situation of tyranny, of sophistry, and of hypocrisy.
Wow. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, for this beautiful lecture. I mean, I consider that as a personal gift for the day. I couldn't help seeing the resonances with Husserl again. Maybe it's my mind, but as we noticed in our previous talks, there are points in which Campanella and Husserl somehow meet. I mean, the criticism of Galileo and the sharp distinction of human beings and then another language is something that pervades Husserl's crisis, and Campanella's critique and acceptance of technology. I mean, technology is something that doesn't have to dominate, but it's something that has to be useful, titani, techne, something that can help this return. Again, it's present in Husserl's Prolegomena to logical investigations and the crisis. And still, the theme of the unity of souls is a theological direction in which the matter goes. It's there. I mean, it's in Husserliana 15, in the manuscripts E3. So I invite our audience to feel free to comment on, of course, ask questions about Campanella, but if you have comments on phenomenology as well, of course, I would be very happy to comment on these questions. And our next session fully dedicated to questions and answers. It will be this Friday, 8 in the morning PS time, and 5 in the afternoon for Europe, Rome, Malta. This connection comes from the university, with the University of Malta, and there will be in the next section a connection with the University of Italy and Cal State University. So if you are interested to join us, just let me know and answer the email, and I will invite you on Zoom. And thank you very much for this excellent lecture, Jean-Paul.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad there are links with Husserl, because phenomenology is not really my cup of tea. But it's interesting to have this kind of dialogue to the more historical and the more closer to us.
For me too. Let's see if we can enhance this dialogue.
We'll explore the links in our next session.
Exactly, next session. So thank you.